Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I was lucky enough to make it into the chamber for the tail end of your contribution to this debate. And while I certainly won't respond to everything you said in your speech, it would be remiss of me not to take the opportunity to address your comments about trickle-down economics. This is a personal bugbear of mine, I admit, but trickle-down economics is something which exists only in the mind of those who are opposed to it. There was actually a study done on this in recent years, and I don't have it to hand, unfortunately, but there is no evidence that throughout economic history that any advocate of supply-side economics, which is a better description of what I think you're referring to, has ever used the phrase trickle-down economics in a persuasive way, in a way that they believe in and arguing for it. It's like neoliberalism. You'll hear and find a lot about neoliberalism in universities and among the minds of those who are opposed to neoliberalism, but no one in the history of economic thought has described themselves as a neoliberal. Anyway, that's not the substantive issue that we're here to debate today, but let me also just respond to Senator Watt's comments about Reaganomics. I think, unfortunately, he's got his history a little bit wrong, as often the case in this area. The tax cuts that Ronald Reagan presided over as president were primarily to personal income tax cuts, although there also were company tax cuts under his presidency. They were very substantial cuts to the rates of personal income tax cuts in America. But to say that that caused the deficit in America under his presidency is curious on a number of grounds. One of those, and most importantly, is that the revenue collected from individuals after their tax rates were cut, in fact, increased rather than decreased. And this is something that's been seen throughout economic history, but particularly through US-American history. It was the case under President JFK, as it was the case under President Reagan. Cuts to individual tax rates, in fact, resulted in increased levels of revenue for the government, not decreased levels of revenue. But with those two historical side points aside, I wanted to address the substance of the debate here today. I'm very proud to be here to speak in favour of the government's bill to the government's enterprise tax plan, because I believe it will make Australia more competitive, more prosperous, it will encourage more investment, and ultimately that will lead to higher wages and better jobs for Australians. So I'm very proud to be here to support this policy today. But you need not take my word for it. I realise that Senator Dastyari and others may be sceptical about my views on this issue, and so I won't rely alone on my views and the facts and evidence that I'll take you through here this morning. I'll rely on the views of those that I know that Senator Dastyari respects greatly, and that is of his own Labor colleagues, who helpfully have been extensively on the record on this issue in recent years, and I think have made some very sensible observations. There was the comment made by the then Assistant Treasurer, Bill Shorten, who's now our opposition leader, who said in 2011, and I quote, "Cutting the company income tax rate increases domestic productivity and domestic investment. More capital means higher productivity and economic growth that leads to more jobs and higher wages." I couldn't have put it better myself, Mr Acting Deputy President. Chris Bowen, in his book Hearts and Minds in 2013, said, "It is a Labor thing to have the ambition of reducing company tax because it promotes investment, creates jobs and drives growth." Hear, hear, Chris Bowen, absolutely spot on. Bill Shorten also said in 2011, again as Assistant Treasurer, "Any student of Australian business and economic history since the mid-1980s knows that part of Australia's success was derived through the reduction of the company tax rate. We need to be able to make life easier for Australian businesses, which employs 2 in every 3 Australians." Hear, hear. Could not agree more. Senator Watt said before that reducing our company tax rates because other countries have done so to ensure that we remain internationally competitive is like following someone who's jumped off a bridge. And that was a particularly graphic metaphor that I encourage him to, when he has the opportunity, discuss with Bill Shorten, his leader, because it in fact repudiates Bill Shorten's previous view on this issue. Again, as Assistant Treasurer in 2011, he said, The government's tax reform agenda has a strong focus on ensuring that Australia remains an attractive place to invest. Cutting the company tax rate is an important step along that road. This recognises the benefits to investment and growth from lower company tax rates and a trend to lower rates across the OECD over the past 30 years. So Senator Watt here today is repudiating the very words and arguments made by his own leader not more than 6 years ago. As Chris Bowen said, again in his book in 2013, in the chapter Promoting Growth Through Cutting Company Tax — what a great title for a chapter on economic reform. I couldn't have written it better myself, Senator Daciari. He said, Keating knew that the corporate tax rate needed to be cut to make Australia competitive, that capital and investment would flow to tax-competitive nations, and this was an important job creation move. Today, capital is even more mobile than it was then, and it is important that our corporate tax rate is more competitive. I didn't know, in Senator Watt's words, that Mr Bowen was an enthusiast for jumping off a bridge to follow others, but it seems that he is. So I encourage Senator Watt to take that up with his now Shadow Treasurer. Of course, Shadow Treasurer also said on Late Line in December 2014, I'd like to see it, being the company tax rate, lower over time. I think we've had 14 years of having the corporate tax rate stable. That's too long. Over time, I'd like to see it lowered. Indeed. As the Alternative Treasurer, I'm telling you that it would be a better thing if Australia's corporate tax rate was more competitive. That's very hard to argue with. In 2013, he said, I think we should have the ambition of lowering the company tax. It would be the approach that we would take, that our ambition would be lower company tax rates over time because it does improve our international competitiveness. Again, I think very eloquently responding to Senator Watt's arguments before. I was very touched to hear Senator Watt's concern about the federal government deficit and the debt that has been accrued and continues to accrue under the federal government. I share his concern, and I'm very pleased to see him speaking about it here. But I think, unfortunately, in this instance, he's being a little bit disingenuous on a couple of grounds. First of all, as we know, the Labor Party's record in government in this area is not one to boast about. They inherited a very good set of books and they left them in a parlous state. And there's no need to go over the ancient history of details of that, but I think their record in this area, in this department, is abundantly clear. Also abundantly clear is the extraordinary lengths they have gone to attempt to prevent this government from fixing the mess that they created, to attempt to prevent this government from paying for the things that they spent when they were in government. But particularly disingenuous by Senator Watt was the fact that he believes that these company tax cuts are going to expand the deficit and expand the debt. It's disingenuous because, as Senator Watt I'm sure would know, the Labor Party during the election campaign not just spent every single dollar that would be spent in this company tax cut plan, but $16.5 billion extra. So Senator Watt's concern about the deficit, I think, would be more fairly and more better focused on his own party's policies, which, even if the company tax cuts did not proceed, would be worsened by at least $16.5 billion, just taking their election policy, not even taking into account what they've proposed since. And of course, it's another thing which the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, has refuted. He says, and I think he's right, he says, again in Hearts and Minds, a great book which I'm very pleased to be assisting and promoting today, the United Kingdom, facing a much tougher fiscal situation than Australia, cut its company tax rate to 23% in April 2013, to be reduced further to 21% in April 2014. So here is Chris Bowen saying that despite the deficit that the UK has, it has proceeded with company tax cuts, and that was the right thing to do. Well, I entirely agree. But again, I hate to point out Senator Watt is out of step with his colleagues on this issue. Now, I thought when I was contemplating my contribution to this debate this morning that I should revisit the Henry Tax Review, because it is the most recent and most comprehensive review of our taxation system. It was done under the former government, and it was done by a person that I don't think anyone in this chamber would suggest is a neoliberal or an advocate of trickle-down economics. I stand to be corrected, but I somehow doubt that. Now, there are a number of interesting aspects of the Henry Tax Review on the issue of company tax, which I commend to all senators who are considering how they vote on this bill later on this week. The first is the Henry Tax Review very powerfully demonstrated how out of step Australia's company tax rate is with the rest of the world. And they were doing so in May 2010, and the data that they used, and this is on page 39 of the report, the data that they used was from 2009. So things have moved on since 2009, and I'll update the Senate in just how they've moved on. But in 2009, these are the OECD countries that had a lower corporate tax rate in Australia: the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Norway, Mexico, Portugal, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, Greece, Denmark, Austria, Korea, Switzerland, Turkey, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, Poland, Iceland and Ireland. That was in 2009. The only handful of countries that had a higher corporate tax rate in the OECD and Australia in those years were Germany, France, the United States and Japan. Now, already Ken Henry and his review were concerned that Australia was becoming out of step with the rest of the world on corporate tax. But what has happened since should give everyone in this chamber pause for much greater concern, because very many of those countries I just listed, including both those who already had a lower corporate tax rate than us and those who have had a higher tax rate than us, have since further reduced their company tax rates. They have cut their company tax rates further. So Australia is becoming even more out of step with the OECD. Our company tax is becoming even less competitive, and it is likely that it will become less competitive still, particularly if the President Donald Trump is successful in his plan to reduce the United States corporate tax rate down to 15%, as he has promised to do, and if Germany follows suit, as they have promised to do if Trump is successful, and if the UK continues to cut its corporate tax rate as a way of ensuring it remains competitive after its exit from the European Union, as Theresa May, the Prime Minister, has flagged it will do. So Australia was already dangerously out of step in 2009, and we have become only more so since. Our international position and competitiveness has been eroded even further than worried Ken Henry so much in 2009. I'll quote directly from the report now, and again I remind senators this is Ken Henry's report under a Labor government, and he said, quote, "Australia should respond to these developments by reducing the company income tax rate to 25% over the short to medium term." Presumably the short to medium term from 2009 is right about now. He goes on to say, "This would ensure that Australia remains an attractive place to invest. Reducing taxes on investment, particularly company income tax, would also encourage innovation and entrepreneurial activity. Such reforms would increase income for Australians by building a larger and more productive capital stock and by generating technology and knowledge spillovers that boost the productivity of Australian businesses. A lower company income tax rate would also reduce incentives for foreign multinationals to shift profits out of Australia." Again, that is in the words of Ken Henry. One of the reasons why the government is proposing this reform is because we know that the benefits of a lower corporate tax rate will flow through to workers' wages and income. We know that reducing the company tax rate, which will increase investment and profitability of Australian companies, will ultimately and decisively benefit Australian workers. This is something which has been studied widely. The Tax Foundation in the United States, for example, found that wages rise $2.50 for every $1 reduction in state and local corporate income taxes. Treasury modelling predicts that the enterprise tax plan will increase gross national income by up to 0.8% and wages after tax by more than 1%. One study estimated that a 10 percentage point increase in the corporate tax rate would decrease annual gross wages by 7%, with a similar impact on low and high-skilled workers. Over time, the amount of capital investment in Australia is reduced by an uncompetitive business tax rate. And this is particularly important as the tax rates of our competitors and our sources of foreign direct investment reduce. Our largest foreign direct investor, the United States, currently today has a company tax rate which is higher than ours, but as I've said, they have a plan to reduce it. And if they do, we may see a sharp reduction in the flow of investment from our largest source of foreign direct investment, and that would have very serious consequences for the wages of Australian workers. This is something that Andrew Lee, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, has acknowledged and has said that there's a strong link between company tax rate and wages. He's quoted studies which estimate that an increase in company taxes by 10 percentage points lead to a fall in wages by 6 to 10%. An important thing to bear in mind is that the benefits of reducing the company tax rate will be permanent and long-lasting for the Australian economy. It will be something which will reap the benefits of going forward. This is not just a once-off sugar hit like the stimulus packages put in place by those opposite that we are still paying for today. This is a permanent improvement in Australia's competitiveness and productivity that will deliver dividends for decades to come. Treasury modelling shows that a 5% reduction in business tax will deliver a permanent boost to the economy of about 1% over the long run, as I mentioned. Australian modelling predicts that reducing the company tax rate from 30% to 25% would result in a permanent increase in business investment of up to 2.9% over a similar period, which is equivalent to about $6.5 billion in today's dollars. To compare, the highly successful and revered by all sides of politics and economists reforms preceded by the Hilmer Report in the 1990s delivered about a 2.5% boost to the economy. So when those opposite talk about the economic reform legacy of Keating, as they should and are entitled to do, and they talk about the benefits delivered by the competition reforms, which were very real and were very positive, they should bear in mind that they delivered a smaller boost to the economy than this tax cut to businesses will. In the United States, it's been estimated that a 1% cut in local business taxes can increase the number of local establishments by about 3 to 4% over a 10-year period. The OECD has found that corporate income taxes are the most harmful major tax when it comes to economic growth. UK modelling predicted that reducing the company tax rate from 28% to 20% would result in a permanent increase in investment of up to 4.5% over a 20-year period. And that reminds me of another key finding of the Henry Tax Review, and this is on page 13, under the chapter entitled The Need for Reform, which I think is even more prescient today than it was in 2009. The Treasury ranked taxes by the marginal welfare loss generated by increasing those taxes. And this is a common method to determine which taxes have the least deadweight loss on the economy and which taxes therefore can raise revenue with the least negative impact on welfare. Now, they ranked these from the greatest loss in welfare to the lowest loss in welfare, and the three first taxes are the state-based taxes, which obviously we don't have direct control over, and they were royalties and crude oil tax, insurance taxes and payroll tax. They are the ones that have the most potentially negative effect on welfare. But the next most harmful, the fourth most harmful tax from a point of view of welfare of Australian people, and it is by far the most damaging tax at the federal level, is the corporate income tax. It is no accident that Ken Henry was recommending, primarily among all the other recommendations he made, the reduction of the company income tax rate, because it is the tax which is under the direct control of the federal government which has the most damaging impact on our economy. I spoke before about the fact that cuts to company tax rates will be permanent and long-lasting, but the other important thing about them is that they will be immediate. It will have an immediate impact on our economy, an immediate boost, not just to small businesses who, under our plan, will take advantage immediately of a reduction in tax rates, and that's a very important aspect of the plan, but also to medium and larger sized businesses who, if this full package is legislated, will have confidence that the investments that they make today, which have a long lead time and which may not return a profit for many years, will be returned in a favourable tax environment, and that will encourage them to make those investments today. One of the most important things we can do is to deliver certainty to those businesses that there will be a good economic return on their investment in the years to come. So even if we cut their taxes today in legislation and that effect does not happen for many years' time, we can expect to see an immediate improvement in business investment. But those companies are sitting around today and watching what we're doing and deciding whether or not to invest. And there's no way that they're going to invest until they see action by this parliament to demonstrate that they should invest. So if we are worried, as we all should be, about the declining rates of investment in Australia, about the low rates of investment in Australia and the impact that that has on the take-home pay of workers, on the returns for retirees in their retirement, then the best thing we can do is not just pass part of this package, but pass every bit of this package today to deliver instant benefits to small business and long-term benefits for the country.
Thank you, Senator Paterson.